Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Lamed Tet. This week's learning is dedicated to Dr. Joseph Waldron, who supported Torah study across the Jewish world. We're going to get started with a review of the very end of yesterday's daf. This is unfortunately a very, very relevant daf. This topic is about basically what we do with the property of people that were taken into captivity, okay, or run away or something like that, which unfortunately we're very, it's a very relevant topic today, particularly, when you think about, and we'll see as we go along today's daf, you'll see some of the issues that are actually coming up in Israel today about people volunteering, people going to pick in people's fields, right? Some of the cases are because they don't have workers, but some of the cases are people whose fields are not anymore there. Were taken into captivity and they're no longer there to deal with their property. So the main thing the Gemara is concerned about, or the rabbis are concerned about, is who's going to do the best, who's going to deal with the property in the best manner. And thinking always, when it comes to land, thinking about the long-term issues, thinking about what's good for the land in the long term. If you're working the land temporarily, you're going to do things differently. If you want to, get the most produce out of the land so you'll benefit the most, than if you're thinking long-term. So who better to deal with it than a relative? And when we say relative, we mean a relative who's going to inherit the property if, God forbid, you don't come back from captivity. Because they're the people who have, again, you have to read this daf with a mind focused on self-interest, okay? Because, you would think, out of the goodness of your heart, you'll do a good job because you're concerned, you want to do the best thing for the people. But the Gemara is always worried about the people who are out there for self-interest and people who will take advantage. And unfortunately, we know there are people who take advantage of these kind of situations. So to protect from people who may take advantage and have self-interest, the person who's best to deal with this is a relative who will inherit. We're going to see all sorts of exceptions to this rule and other things today. We'll even get into a real-life situation. So we had this machloka between Rav and Shmuel about whether or not we bring in a relative. Okay, so even though we've really been talking about the relative, but not everyone agrees, but we're going to see now that when it comes to really someone taken into captivity and someone who there's rumors already that they died, that they were killed in captivity, that's going to be different from someone who's just taken into captivity and we don't have any news about what happened to them. And it's hard to be learning this one over the weekend. We just heard news of someone who was in captivity who is now killed. This is so difficultly relevant. So let's go back to the Breita for a minute, because now we're going to review parts of the Breita. So the Breita set up 3 different parts, and the middle one was the one that we had a machloket about. There's the shavoi, there's the natush, and there's the ratush. So a shavoi is someone who was taken into captivity, and now we have rumors that they've been killed. And then, okay, I'll just read this, I'll review this outside the text. If you then hear they're coming back, because, could be the information was incorrect, so then you can actually eat as much as you want right now. In other words, quickly say, oh, wow, I put in all this stuff. Let me quickly gather as much as I can. And you actually benefit from that. In other words, that's okay to do. Then we have the ratush, which is on the other extreme. This is someone who leaves. They're somewhere in town. We don't even know where they are. And we're going to see soon, they left of their own volition, their property, kind of abandoned. And that person, you're not allowed to go in at all because they willingly abandon their property. That's a totally different story. Then we have this in-between, which is called natush. So the natush, we have a machloket about. Is it like a shavoi or is it like a ratush? Do we say you can't go in at all because they left? And now this is, again, it could be they left, they abandoned their property against their will, perhaps taken into captivity, for example, and we don't have any news about whether they're alive or dead. Then you can't go in according to one opinion because it's the same kind of idea as the ratush. The other opinion says, no, it's just like a shavoi. That's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, I heard that a natush is like a shavoi, meaning someone who we heard is dead, and therefore you should go into their property and take over. So we have this debate. And now we're going to say, why is natush and why is ratush? Where do we get these words from? This is just etymology, or where we see in the Tanakh. So nitushim, that's the beginning of our daf. Diba'al korcho, that's against your will. How do we know? In the Shemitah year, you're supposed to not work the land, and you're supposed to, unitashta, it's like you abandoned it. Now, why do you abandon the land in the Shemitah year? Afgata demalka, because God commanded you to do it. Not that you wanted to do it. Nobody wants to abandon their land in the Shemitah year, but you're commanded to do it. There's actually a big debate about this term. What it means, Afkata de Malka. If you know, when it's Shemitah, so a lot of people put up signs on their property that says, my fruits, vegetables, whatever it might be, is growing, is hefker, it's ownerless, and it's open to everybody. And that's what people are supposed to do. You're supposed to be mafkir your property. But there's a debate about this word, afka'ata de malka. Is it that God causes your land to be abandoned literally, meaning even if you don't make your land hefker, your land is hefker. So some people say you don't have to actually do anything to say my land is ownerless because God already decreed your land ownerless. Everybody's land is ownerless in the Shemitah year. Some people say, no, it's a commandment from God that you have to do that. But if you don't do it, it's actually not ownerless, but that you're commanded to make it ownerless. And there's all sorts of ramifications about this, but this isn't our topic, so I'm going to not deal with it right now. But I thought it would be interesting that you note that there's a big debate about among the Achronim. There's the Rav Yosef Karo versus the Mabit who debate this issue about whether you actually have to make your stuff ownerless or it's just automatically done. But either which way, the point is this is something against your will. Nitashta is against your will, and that's how we get that was you were, let's say, taken in as captive. Ritushim demidatan. How do we know? Dichtiv ema banim rutasha. It's a pasuk from Moshe, which talks about the people saw the devastation coming and they just left. They abandoned their property. Now, you might say that's not exactly willingly, and it reminds me of people who left Germany or countries like that. I don't know that you would call that willingly, but who saw things coming and decided to leave on their own. But that's abandoning living on your own. It's not the same as getting kicked off your land. You could see a difference, even though I don't know that you could really call that not, totally willingly. Tana. Now we're going to go back to the Braita. The Braita ends with this phrase. It's going to be a little bit confusing. Vikulam shamin lahen karis. And all these people who come to their relatives' land and work the land get a percentage like a sharecropper. So now they're going to say, what? Ahaya, what is this referring to? All of them? First, it can't be all of them. Well, ilema ashvuyin. Now we basically have, there's three categories, but we basically have two categories. And this will make it easier if you view it like this. We either have shvuyim on the one hand, which it says you can go and even if you hear they're coming home, right, you can eat as many fruits as you can before they get there. That's one extreme. We have on the other extreme the ratush, which abandon their property willingly, and you're not allowed to go at all. And then we have the natush, which depending on who you hold by is either like category 1 or like category 2 or 3, whatever you call it. But either which way, we end up with really two categories. It's just a debate where the middle one, Nitushim, goes, whether it's like Shavoi or whether it's like Ratush. So basically what we're going to say is it doesn't make sense that this line is on Shavoi, and it doesn't make sense that it's on Ratush. And then by default, it wouldn't make sense that it's on Natush because Natush is either like a Shavoi or like a Ratush. So hopefully this makes sense, but you'll see it inside now. I'm just kind of setting up the structure. So to what is this referring that you get percentages like a sharecropper? Okay, what this means is, you invested in the land. You came into your relative's property to deal with the land. And obviously you invested because you have to invest in land. You get back a percentage of your investment. So, and presumably we're talking about after they come back, right? They come back to their land. Now, I just put in all this money. What, I'm not going to get anything from it? So I'll get a percentage. Usually sharecroppers make about a third, depending on what the going rate is for that neighborhood, but let's just say a third, you get a third of the profits of your investment back. So Ahaya, in what case are we talking about? Well, if it's about shvuyin, if it says when you hear your relative is coming back, you can eat as much as you want and you'll just gain by doing that. You don't need to talk about, obviously you're going to get, once they come back, you're going to get a percentage of what you put into it, obviously. So you don't need to say it on that. Now, ritushim, if your relative willingly abandoned their property, you're not, and you go down into their property, we take it away from you. You're not allowed anything. Of course, you're not going to get percentages like a sharecropper. Ela anitushim, well, can't work for that either because we just said, leman, according to. If you say like the rabbis, well, the rabbis say natush motziin oto miyado, we take it away from you. Ha'amrei motziin oto miyado, right? They said you can't use it. Of course, you're not going to get your percentages back. Shimon Gamliel said, I heard they're like shvuyim. Shvuyim, you don't even need to say you get like an aris. To which the Gemara answers, Kishvuyin velo shvuyin. Wait. From Shimon Gamliel says natush. Again, what's the difference? Shavui is someone who we already heard was taken into captivity and has died there. In the end, they come back, but we heard that there's rumors that they're dead, as opposed to the natush, who let's say is taken into captivity, but we don't have any rumors at all about whether they're alive or dead. So we believe they're still alive. And then the assumption is that's just like a shavui, according to Rashbag. But now they say, well, it's like a shavui, but it's not exactly like a shavui. In what way? And then this line, Shamin Lahem Ka'aris, is talking about that line. Okay, that case. Kishvuyin de emotzino tamiyado. That if you go down into your relative's property, we don't kick you out. You can stay there. Velo shvuyin, but it's different from shvuyin de ilu hatam zariz v'niskal. V'ilu hacha shamin le ka'aris. There, zariz v'niskar. There you can take all the fruits, right? When you hear they're coming back, you get to eat whatever you want before they show up. Once they show up, then you get like a sharecropper. But again, didn't need to tell you that. It's obvious you're at least going to get your percentage back once they show up. But the shavui, if you hear they're dead, and then when they come back, and now here there's a big debate about this. Okay, how to understand this thing. Now I'm going to confuse you probably a little bit, but I think it's really interesting and worth stating this big machloket here. What this means, hacha sheminan leika'aris. Debate between Rashi and the Rambam versus Tosfot. If we're talking about, so again, we have a natush. We have someone who, let's say, was taken into captivity. We have no idea of their whereabouts, of whether they're alive or dead, so we don't have rumors that they've died. You come and work their property. So what did we say? You're not like a shavui. We don't kick you out. But according to Rashi and the Rambam, you only get percentages of that time. The whole time you're working the land. Now, there's a debate among Rashi and the Rambam. I'm going to, again, this is a little detail-oriented for what we normally do, but I think it's just interesting to mention. So Rashi and the Rambam have this small debate about what they assume is until the relative shows up, you get percentages. According to Rashi, from day one, you basically sell the produce that you make. A third goes to you. 2/3 you sell, and you put that money aside for your relative. According to the Rambam, no, you take everything. But when if the relative shows up, then you have to give them 2/3 or whatever it is. I'm using a third as our example, but you have to give them the percentage. You work as if you're a sharecropper, so retroactively. You go back and recalculate, where you have to keep good books about how much you made on this field. And then so they have a debate either which way. What they're basically saying, to not get too complicated, the first part, we treat you like an aris. Right? And that's how it's different from a shavui. A shavui, you get all the proceeds. Remember, Harei says arizvel v'niskar. You can even eat when you know they're on their way back. You get to eat. If you don't know that they're dead and you've been working their land, basically, if they show up, you only get a percentage of all the proceeds that you did. Once they show up, you get nothing. You invested, doesn't matter. You don't get anything. Tosfot says no. The aris is on the second part. Once they show up, and that the first part, you're going to get everything. You get everything. The only difference is if you hear they're coming back, you can't start eating as much as you want. Okay, that you can't do. And when they come back, you get percentages. In other words, from the moment you hear they're coming back, you already only get percentages. That's the difference between, it's a very small difference according to Tosfot. So the main debate, just to simplify it, is when they say for this natush, this middle category, you get like an aris, is it referring to the beginning part and that you get nothing once they show up? Or do you even get, is it talking about the latter part? You get full until you hear they're alive, until you know they're coming back. Once you know they're coming back, already then you get percentages. Okay, so there's a big debate about this. And then that affects what this next question is about. But the next question, either interpretation, it's going to be on this, that whichever case it is, Rashi or the Rambam on the early part, Tosfot on the later part, the part where you get like an aris. So now they're going to say, in the case where you're in your relative's property and you get like a sharecropper, you're only going to get percentages, but you are going to get percentages of your investment. Why is that different from the following Mishnah? Okay, and we're going to compare it to a case of a husband with his wife's property. What happens with a wife? A woman, she gets married. She comes in with inheritance property that she has. Okay, she inherited property, let's say, from her father. She comes into the marriage. We call that nichse malog, usufruct property. She comes into the marriage with it. The husband, while they're married, gets the payroll. He gets all the produce. And he invests in the land because he's going to get the produce. Now, if he's like this relative, we compare them, let's just think about it. The whole idea is we want him to take care of her property properly, right? So what do? We say you get the proceeds. But what if he divorces her or he dies? What will happen? So according to, if it's like this relative, then what will he get? A percentage of the investment. He invests the money into the land. She doesn't put in the money. She just put in the property. He puts all the money into the land. So you would think he would get percentages, right? Just like this guy. Okay, so now the question is, okay, so again, to just go back, even though you might not follow all this, according to Tosfot, this is a question on the Natush case, because the Natush gets like an aris once the person comes back, because we're really focusing on the percentages, the fact that you get percentages once the relationship is severed, right? Once you no longer should be working the land, you still get percentages on the investment you put in before. According to Rashi, this would have to go back to the case of the Shavoi, because only the Shavoi gets percentages, Rashi and the Rambam, because they say if it was a Natush, once the person's on their way back, you don't get percentages anymore. You're done. You're out of the picture, right? The percentages is on the first part. So that's a minor thing about how to read this question. But either which way, it's talking about when the person comes back, you still get percentages, either Shavoi or a Natush. So Mashtame Hadran, how is it different from the following Mishnah? Let's hear what happens with the husband and his wife. He invested in his wife's property. It could be a situation where he spent a lot of money and he did a bad job investing and only gained some of the payroll. Let's say he invested a lot in the season and then he ate a little and then he divorced her or then he died. Okay. And then his heirs will only get, right now, what will happen? Whatever he ate, and we're done. That's it. He doesn't get anything. Or kim ava chalar be. It could be the reverse. It could be he invested a little, ate a lot, then divorced her, and he gained because he was actually able to make a lot of money on his little bit of money. But the point is, the main point is whatever he invested. Whatever he ate. He doesn't get any money back. He doesn't get any of the produce. Once the relationship is severed, it's the end. So why don't we say the same thing with the relative? Why does, again, depending on the case, Rashi or Tosfot, but why in certain cases is this relative who went into the property going to continue to receive percentages after the person comes back from captivity? So to which they answer, it's different. It's very different. Because, and this really gets into the mindset of this person. Again, you have to remember, it's all about self-interest here. It's not about being nice to your relative, okay? It's more similar to the following case. Now, who remembers miyun? Remember miyun from Nashim? What is miyun? Miyun is a case where a woman, miyun means refusal. It's a case where a minor has no father either, or the father is just not capable of dealing with it, or not around something, let's say went abroad, and usually the father can betroth the minor daughter. And then it's a Torah marriage. Regular, everything is the same. If you want to get divorced, you need a get. But if the father's not around and the mother or the brother betroth her, then we're talking betrothal, okay? They betroth her. She can decide at any point until she becomes like of age, she can decide she's not interested in this man because the marriage is only of rabbinic validity. They only have the power to betroth her on a rabbinic level. So if that's the case, she could just wake up one morning and say, I'm not interested in being in this marriage, and walk out. No get, no nothing. So now let's think about the relationship. A husband and wife are in a very clear relationship, right? That is going to break only in the event of marriage or divorce. But this, and the woman really does not have a lot of control over making that outcome happen, right? She can't give a get. She can't die for him, right? Now, in the case where she could just wake up in the morning and say, I don't want to be married to you anymore, or afternoon, or whatever it might be, she can just walk out. Well, when he deals with her property, all he thinks of is, well, maybe tomorrow she'll just walk out. Why should I put in money into it? Just like the relative, it's the same thing. Maybe the relative will show up from captivity, right? Halavai, but people will come back right away. So, therefore, let's read what it says about this. That's a much better comparison. Al ishtok tana, his minor wife, who was betrothed by her mother or brother. It doesn't say that, but that's what they mean. It's like investing in someone else's property that you don't really have an interest in because, right? Now, what's the issue here? The rabbis, what I said here is the person has their own self-interest. The rabbis want to balance that. So what do the rabbis say? We want to make sure that the husband invests properly in the wife's property. We want to make sure the wife's property gets treated properly. We want to make sure that the person who's in captivity, their property is well tended to. Now, if the person says, not sure it's worth the investment because maybe my relative will show up tomorrow, or maybe my wife will refuse to be married to me tomorrow, and then my investment will just go to nowhere. So therefore, Tekina le Rabbanan ki hechi de lo lifsedinu. Just like there in the case of the wife who's a minor, the rabbi said, in the event of she does miyun and the relationship is severed, he will get percentages on this because otherwise he won't deal with the property properly. Likewise, hachanami, same thing here with the relative. Tekina le Rabbanan ki hechi de lo lifsedinu. In other words, really by letter of the law, as soon as the relative comes back, they get their full property back. But in order to ensure that people deal properly with it and don't think, oh, maybe tomorrow this won't be mine and therefore not really care about it. And if you remember, we've talked about before that there's a difference between dealing with property short-term and long-term. You might just be looking for short-term gains because you see it's in your best interest to do short-term gains. You can plant a lot. It's bad for the land in the long term, but it's good for you for this season. And you think, oh, maybe I'll only be here this season. Hopefully my relative will show up. So you'll ruin the land for them. So we don't want that to happen. So we give you percentages of your investment. So really by law, you're not supposed to get, but the rabbis instituted to make sure that people deal with their relative's property or their wife's property in a proper manner. Now we have another problem with this line though. We said the kulan shamin lahen karis. So we now explain what case it's talking about. It's talking about the Nitushim case, according to Rav Moshe ben Gamliel. And it means, right, and the reason is because of this takana of the rabbis to protect the land and to protect the relative who's in captivity. Now they say, but why does it say v'kulan? All of them. It sounds like the shavui, the natush, and the ratush. We just said, well, the shavui doesn't really need to be said for, and even if it's true, you wouldn't say kulan, right? Because it really refers to the natush case and the shavui case, but certainly isn't referring to the ratush. And kulan usually comes to include something additional. So what's it coming to include? Kulan la tuye man. Which the answer, la tuye hada amar Rav Nachman amar Shmuel. It's to talk about the following thing, and we're not going to hear it right away. First, we're going to quote what Rav Nachman quotes Shmuel as saying, and then we're going to say what Rav Nachman himself said, and then it's going to be relating to that. Shavoi shenishba moridin karov l'nechasav. So we saw this before. This is Shmuel. Shmuel says, if you're taken into captivity, so your relative, we put a relative down there, right? We don't put a random person, we put a relative, because again, the relative is going to inherit ultimately if you don't show up. They're the ones who are going to best deal with the property. Yatsa ledat, but if you went out on your own, that's the Ratush case. Okay, so far we haven't added anything. After Rav Nachman quoted Shmuel, though, Rav Nachman Didei, he himself said, if somebody runs away, they're like a shavoi. And that's what the kulam is referring to. The kulam is also a case of someone who runs away. And now they say, okay, well, what kind of running away from what? If it's that you're running away because you don't want to pay taxes, you want to evade the tax authorities, okay, like the Persians put on a big tax on the Jews and you don't want to do that. So that's running away on your own volition. That's not the same. So that can't be borech. It's a little weird. This is you're murdered someone and you're running away because they're going to take you and give you the death penalty. Okay, and we're talking about the Gentile authorities. It could be maybe they framed you for murdering someone. You didn't really murder someone. I don't know why we're caring about if you're a murderer, why we're trying to protect you, but maybe you were framed as a murderer. Not sure exactly. But we basically have to find a case where it wasn't really your own volition that you're running away. It was really you were forced to run away. That was a side point. Now we're back to our case. And this really reminds me of nowadays. Now, what we said is we're basically going to bring in a relative to deal with the property because they're going to handle it the best. But we're going to distinguish now between long-term and short-term. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Shavoi shenishba, v'hiniach kamal l'ktzor, anavim l'ktzor, tmarim l'gdor, zeitim l'nsok. You've already planted your stuff for the season, and then you get taken into captivity. So now you have all these crops that have grown, right? How many people now are volunteering in places around the country? Again, some of them are because there aren't workers. Some of them are fields that the owners are no longer here. So that we bring in other people, because that's not a matter of investment and all that. That would bring other people, and it's also temporary, right? You think about all these volunteers. How long will this last? The people are willing to volunteer and not take money for helping other people, right? There's a time limit on that. So the short term, we can have volunteers, we can have people come, other people who aren't relatives. And that's also just a very clear job. Cut, right? And these are all different, right? This is your grains, like tzor, your anavim, the picking the grapes. It's all picking your dates and picking your olives. And there's different words for picking of each of these different things in Hebrew. Beit din yordim lenechasav umamidim apitropos. So what does the beit din do? They basically go into your property and they put up an apitropos, a random person. Apitropos we know mostly from Yatomim, right? Orphans usually get an apitropos. Also here, we put an apitropos in charge. It doesn't have to be a relative. Then, right, kotzer botzer v'godero mosek, so the person deals with all that. After that, once that season is over, and now it's in terms of planting and investing, then we bring a relative. To which they say, why don't you just put an apitropos in charge in general? Why not take a different person? To which they answer, apitropi lidiknani lo mukmina. We're going to come back to this line. Diknane, just to teach you some Aramaic, Dalet and Zion switch in Aramaic, like lidkor is lizchol, okay, to remember. So liziknane, for zkenim. Apitropos, people are not willing to be an apitropos for an older person. They're willing to do it for orphans, not for an older person. Why is that? So some people say, and Rashi says, it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to come and be an apitropos for orphans. Okay, it's a matter of dealing with orphans and being nice to orphans, and they're in a difficult place. That there's a commandment to do. So people do it because it's a mitzvah. The assumption is you're not paying this apitropos, right? First of all, who's paying? The person in captivity isn't here. So for an orphan, people are willing to do it, but for people who are not orphans, they're not really willing to do it. So we can now. One reason is because there's a mitzvah. The Ritva, I think it is, I saw, says that there's a time limit on orphans. They're going to grow up at a certain point. So people are willing to take a job that they know there's a beginning and an end. They're not willing to take a job that could last forever, right? We don't know, God forbid, right? We're in this situation right now. We don't know how long these people will be taken into captivity. We don't know, will they be returned? We don't know. This could go on for a long time. People are not willing to do things for so long without knowing there's an end in sight. They don't want to commit to something that they don't know they'll be able to follow through. So that's another interesting reason as to why. The point is, however we understand the reason, generally people are not willing to do this. So, and this explains, by the way, why we can appoint an apitropos, if you go with the Ritva, to do the harvesting, because that's a temporary job. And that's why I was thinking about volunteers, right? How long will this volunteer thing continue? How long will people keep volunteering to do agriculture? I don't know, right? Already, I'm sure the amount of people in the beginning is not the same as the amount of people now, because things that continue on for a long time, people aren't always willing to do. So because of that, then we go with the relative who, again, has a self-interest because they'll inherit, and that will do. Now Rav Huna is going to say there's 3 exceptions to the rule where we don't allow a relative to go. So Amar Rav Huna, and then, by the way, if you don't have a katan, then the Beit Din's going to have to find some other person to do it. If the only people are minors who are relatives of those taken captivity, we don't put a minor in charge, because what does a minor know about dealing with property, right? They're going to mess up the property. The whole point is to have the property handled well. If they're a minor, they're not going to be able to handle it properly. Now, the other 2 are going to be exceptions to the rule. If it was a minor who has property, let's say they inherited property from their father, and then they were taken into captivity. Ain't lo karov l'nechsei katan. You don't bring a relative into the property of a minor. And lo karov machmak karov l'nechsei katan. We're going to have to understand what that means. We'll get to that soon. So, now the Gemara is going to go through the 3 things that Rav Huna explained each of them. So this I already explained. You don't bring a katan into the nechasim of an older relative who gets taken into captivity, because he might ruin the property, because what does a katan know about dealing with property? Now I'm going to skip this next line and we'll come back to it in a minute. It's a little weird, the Gemara switches the order, because it's very hard to understand unless you understand the next one. So I'm skipping for a minute and we'll come right back. The lo karov l'nechsei katan. If someone gets taken into captivity the brother who could inherit if they share the same father, we don't allow to go into the property, because what will happen? The katan will come back and the brother will say, oh, this was mine. I inherited this. And the katan won't know any better, right? The older brother will take advantage of the younger brother. We're always worried with minors. They don't really know what's going on. So when they come back from captivity, they could be even older at the time, but they'll have no idea that this was land that was supposed to be coming to them. They'll see the brother living in the land. The brother will, now remember, the land that belongs to this minor is obviously land they inherited from the father, which the brother also had a share in. So the brother will claim this is his, and the minor won't know to argue, and it will be a good case of where someone can easily take advantage of his younger brother. Fortunately, we know situations, siblings do that, so therefore we don't allow the brother to do it. And now we got to get to the more complicated one, which is, let's go back a line. Below karov mahmat karov l'nichse katan, not a relative on account of a relative of a, okay, we'll see what this is in a second. Ba'achei me'ima. So we started with the case, that's why you had to know the first case first. We had two brothers. The older brother can't go into the minor brother's property because when the minor comes back, the older brother will just claim it's his own. Now we're talking about the older brother has a brother that they share a mother. Now, usually, this brother is not even related to the katan, okay? But in other words, now what we're basically saying is anyone in the world can come and work this property, just not the brother and not the brother's brother where they share a mother. Now, they can't share a father because if they share a father, it's just a brother, of the minor. So now we're talking about that brother of the minor, the older one, has a brother through that they share the mother. Now, because of that, they're related. Now, they're not related when it comes to inheritance, but they're related enough that if the brother through the mother, okay, who again is not related to the minor at all, just is the half-brother of his brother, takes over the property, because his own brother, okay, let's call them Reuven and Shimon. So Reuven is the one who has the brother who's the minor, and Shimon is the brother through the mother. Now, Shimon, if he takes over the property, has no connection to this minor, but he'll say, oh, I'm dealing with the property for Reuven, and it's really Reuven's property because he's my brother and I'm in his property. So they could kind of pull it away from the minor. So because of that, we're also worried, okay, Rav Huna was suspect. He was really concerned with people taking advantage. So we didn't allow not the brother from the father and also not that brother's brother through the mother. I'm a Rav. But now, what does it seem, though? Anyone else can take over. Now, there's a law we're going to get to in Bava. We've talked about this before, that you can acquire land by chazaka. What does that mean? If I'm working the land for 3 years, living in property or working land or whatever it might be, living in a house, and nobody has protested, I can claim it's my own, and that will uphold in a court of law. But comes Rav and says, Shmami Nami de Rav Huna, from the fact that Rav Huna doesn't allow a relative and only allows strangers to be working this land for the minor. What do you see here? You obviously can't, even though you can prove ownership over land using this chazaka, I've been living there for 3 years and no one has complained, you can't, and basically we have proof. The last proof we have is that Reuven bought the land, and now David is coming and claiming it's mine. If David lived there for 3 years and Reuven didn't complain, then David can prove it's his, unless Reuven's a minor. Because if Reuven's a minor, even if now he's not a minor, but the last proof, and I forgot to say, the last proof we have is that it was Reuven's land. But now David's been living there for 3 years, and no one can say that they've ever seen Reuven complain. That land becomes David's, but not if Reuven was a minor. And that when Reuven got the land, the last proof we have is that Reuven inherited the land when he was a minor. No one can ever prove chazaka, because otherwise we wouldn't allow, that Rav Huna is basically allowing anybody else to come and use the land and isn't worried they're going to take advantage. Why? Because by chazaka alone, they're not allowed to take property away from a katan. Okay, so even though chazaka works in general, it won't work if the person's a minor, even if now they're not a minor. But because we assume a minor doesn't know anything, and because what's the whole point of chazaka? No one protested, but why would this minor protest? Assuming, let's say they got out of captivity and it's been 3 years since then, and they haven't protested, why can't David prove it's his? Because otherwise, right, we wouldn't let David come into the land if he could prove it from chazaka. The whole problem is we're worried Tom will come back from captivity, won't know he owns land, because what does he remember from when he was a kid? And people will take advantage. So from here, if the katan has somehow finds later on a document that says the property was his, he can prove it's mine. And even though David was living there for 10 years, doesn't make a difference. Now we're going to try to limit these statements of Rav Huna, and then we're going to see this actually isn't successful. But they're going to say the following. Lo amaran ela ba'achei da'aba, ba'achei da'ima leit lamba. Well, this goes with what we said before. Okay, top of Amud Bet. This is all. Now, the fact that we don't let the brother go into the property is a brother who can inherit, not a brother from the mother who can't inherit. We get into all laws of inheritance in Bava Batra. We'll learn them better, but two brothers who share the same mother don't inherit the same property. But brother from the mother, there's no problem because we're not worried he's going to claim it's my own. And even when we're worried the brother's going to take over, that's only land. It's not a house. Because a house has neighbors. The neighbors will know. So when the kid comes back, they'll say, oh yeah, it's not the brother's property, it's the minor's property. They'll vouch for it. But in land, people don't know which field is whose. And even if land, we say it's a problem, that's when there's no partnership agreement. When the father dies, the brothers don't write up an agreement. But if they did a document, everyone will know. It'll be pop, right? Word will spread. And then in all those cases, we're not worried about the brother being able to take advantage of the little brother. But then the Gemara says for Lohi, this is not true. First of all, sometimes, so if the mother has no other relatives, sometimes the sons will inherit from her. If her husband's not alive, right? There could be cases. And doesn't matter land, it doesn't matter houses. Maybe the relatives didn't pay attention, the neighbors didn't pay attention. Just because they had a partnership agreement, could be the stars disappeared. So lo machtina, we don't allow this. Really, we hold by Rav Huna, what was Rav Huna? Yeah. Hold by Rav Huna, who basically limited the ability of a relative when it's a minor. Okay, now we're going to have two cases, and with that, we'll finish our daf. Hahi safta. Okay, the first case is directly connected to our situation. The second case, at this point, what we're going to read today, it's not connected at all, but we'll connect it tomorrow. Hahi safta dahavi tzlat binat. There was a woman, elderly woman, who had 3 daughters. Some people say specifically because she was elderly, she gets taken into captivity, and there was more likelihood that she would die in captivity because she was older. Some people say no, they called her a safta because there's a grandchild in the picture. We'll see, and maybe that's why. Not clear. But we had this woman. She had 3 daughters. Ishtabai ihi v'chadabarta. So now her and one of the daughters gets taken into captivity. Idach tarte bin to the other 2 daughters. Now let's go see what they're up to. Shchiva chadaminai. One of them dies. In the meantime, v'shavke yenuka, and she leaves over a child. We'll see soon the child was already older. Okay, not really older, but kind of on the border of maturity. Amar Abaye, hechineavid. So now what do we do with her land? We have a few problems based on, this is like a good summary of our daf. Lukuminu l'nichse biyada da'achta, domashchiva safta. If you want to say, well, let's give it all to the daughter, the one who's still alive, the one daughter that's alive and not taken captive. Well, domashchiva safta, maybe the grandmother's already dead. And if she's dead, eimoridim karov l'nichse katan. Well, then what happens? It divides 3, right? A third, a third, a third. One is a captive. Okay, well, she could take over her sister's property if her sister's in captivity. But one of them is a minor. And we don't give a sibling rights over a minor's property because she might take advantage and claim it's her own later. Nukminu l'nichse, first of all, it's a nice case because it's all women. Nukminu l'nichse biyada, other than this one child. Ukimna l'nichse biyada diyanuka, well, if we give the child the property, what's the problem? Right? What do we learn? You can't give, maybe the grandmother's still alive. And if the grandmother's still alive, then you're basically giving rights to the minor for property of someone who's in captivity. And even if the grandmother's not alive anymore, the mother, then her daughter who's in captivity with her might still be alive. And then a third of it belongs to her. And then you have this minor dealing with property of someone who's in captive. Can't be that. So now we're going to have a debate. Those are the issues. Now we're going to have a debate, Rav and Abaye, what to do. Amay amal. So we're going to split it. 50% goes to the sister who's alive and well and not in captivity. And for the other 50%, we put Nabitropos in charge because Nabitropos can deal with. Now, what was the problem with Nabitropos? Well, Nabitropos won't deal with someone's property if they're older, but half of this we'll give to the minor. Now it's perfect because half is basically she takes over her part, and right, it could be all the grandmothers right now. So she takes over half the grandmother's property and deals with it. The minor can't deal with the other half because maybe the grandmother's still alive, So she'll deal with the 50%, right? And then we'll have an apitropos take care of that. And then we have an apitropos, we're all good. Comes Rava and he says, now we said, this is where we're going to come back to this thing. You don't set up an apitropos for someone's property if they're older, because apitropos won't do that. But comes Rava and says, once you have an apitropos coming, that's the best. Normally, we don't do it because we're not going to find someone who's willing to do it, but we already have them willing to deal with 50% of it. So just have them deal with the whole thing. Okay. And therefore, Rava thinks in this case, just put an apitropos on the whole thing. And with that, you deal with the problem. Well, the story unfortunately has a bad ending, which is the self shamu deshli v'safta. Then they find out that the grandmother died. So now what do we do? And now we're going to have the same split, but a little bit differently. We're going to explain it a little differently. Abaye. Well, now at this point, it's owned by 3 women. What's the problem? Well, one woman's dead and it goes to her child. One woman's still in captivity. So the part in captivity, we still need the relatives to deal with it. Again, we're going to have the same problem. The katan can't deal with it. And the mother, right? The other sister can deal with it, right? She's the relative. So what do? Abaye, tilta yavina leila achta. A third goes to the sister. That's her share. Tilta yavina leila yanuka. The child gets the other third. That's his share. This is why they assume, because Tosafot says, what do you mean you're giving it to the child? The child doesn't know how to deal with their own property, but they claim the child was already getting older and could really handle their own property, but not old enough to handle someone else's property who's in captivity, because that's a different story. So idach tilta, what do we do with the other third? That, again, either belongs to the sister who's in captivity or the sister's dead, in which case it's split 50-50 between the sister and the grandchild. So idach danka, the other third, I didn't read this right. Idach tilta, sorry, I looked at the wrong line. The other third, what do we do with it? Yavina danka la'achta. A sixth of that, meaning half of the third, a sixth goes to the sister. And then we have an apitropos in charge of this 1/6 of the property. So Rava says the same thing as before. Rava Amar, migo de apitropos ledanka, mukwina labi apitropos leidach. When it comes now, here they're just debating this extra third. Once you're putting up an apitropos for 1/3, we basically put an apitropos up for the other third. The third that belongs to the third sister, of course she gets. And the third that belongs to the child gets. But when it comes to this third that's left is the sister stuff. So again, there's this debate. Does half go to the sister and half to the child? And then we put an apitropos. Or once you're putting an apitropos, just put up an apitropos for the whole third. Okay, now we get to a different story. Mari bar Isak. We now have this guy, Mari bar Isak, we're going to find out was a bit of a thug kind of guy and a bit scary. So now, Mari bar Isak. So Mari bar Isak, a guy shows up from Beit Hozai. Beit Hozai, if you remember, is always this place that's far away. And says, Amalei Plogli. He says, right, this guy comes and says, Atale Achami Beit Hozai, his brother comes and says, you took all our father's property. Okay, Rashi explains what happened was, father was living in the place where Mari bar Isak was. The father goes to Beit Hozai, marries a woman there, has a child. Mari bar Isak apparently claims, the brother claims, you knew of my existence, and you just took all the property of our fathers. And now the guy shows up from far away, and he says, I want 50%. So Amarle, lo yadan alach. So Mari bar Isak says, I don't know who you are. You're not my brother. You can imagine the scene. Ata lekamei de Rav Chisda. So they come before Rav Chisda, and the guy claims Mari bar Isak is a total liar. Rav Chisda says he's not a total liar. And where will I prove it from? Yosef. How so? Amalei shapir kamala. It's possible you really are his brother. And it's also possible he's not lying. Why? He doesn't recognize you because Shenemar, Vayakir Yosef et Echavehem lo hikihu. Yosef recognized his brothers and they didn't recognize him. Now, generally we think because he was in this, it was very out of context. They didn't expect to meet him there. He was the second to the king. He was wearing this Egyptian garb. But the Midrash says, what's the reason? Like, why did he recognize them and not him? Very obvious. He was young when he left. He hadn't grown a beard yet. He hadn't matured yet. So he looked very different. So they didn't recognize him, but they were older than Yosef. So he recognized them because they had already reached maturity. You don't change so much from age, 18 to, right? He was 17 when he left. So let's say 18 to, 40. You don't look that much different. So I forget exactly how many years, right? Forget. But anyway, so because of that, it could be the brother was the younger brother, and maybe you don't recognize him now. So I get that. So what does Rav Chisda say? Okay, you want to take money from Mari bar Isak? Go prove it. Go bring witnesses that you're the brother. Amrle, Ilisade. He says, I have witnesses, but nobody will come forward and testify because Mari Bar Isak is a thug. He'll beat them up. They don't want to testify. So so he turns to Mari Bar Isak and he says, Zil and Aitisade de lava. You go prove Mari Bar Isak that he's not your brother. Okay, some of the commentators said there's no way to prove he's not your brother. What does this mean exactly? But let's just leave it. He says the burden of proof is on you. And if you can't prove it, basically what he's basically saying is, you're not going to be able to do that, so I'm going to take it away from you. So first question he says is, Amrle Dina Hachi? He says, what? That is not the law. He wants to take money from me. He's got to prove it. To which Rav Chisda says to him, Amrle, Hachi Danina Lahu L'cho Alime Dechavra. Sorry, but this is what we do with thugs like you. Okay? You're a thug, you got to live with it. Okay? Right? What did it say? You got to sleep in the bed you make, right? Your problem. Amrle, so Mari Bar Isak is very smart. He says, you get to be a thug for nothing. Sof sof atu sade v'lo masade. Well, you want me to bring witnesses, and you think people are scared of me, right? So I'll bring witnesses, and you won't trust them anyway, because you'll say they're just doing it because Mari Bar Isak was going to beat them up if they didn't say so. So you're not going to even accept my testimony anyway, so what's the point? To which he answers, Amrle tartilo ade. Two things people won't do. People might not testify for Mari Bar Isak, but they're not going to also not testify for him and lie for you. That already is not, we don't expect people lie that much. Okay, and therefore you're stuck. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue the story tomorrow, and we'll have to see how the story unfolds. Okay, so we're left with basically Rav Chisda rules against Mari Bar Isak and says the burden of proof is on you. Let's see what happens. So let's just review our daf. We talked about the different possibilities of why someone will leave their property and what the laws are as a result. Do we encourage a relative to come, right? Or if not that, then maybe we have to find someone else. And then we talked about the problems with finding someone else. People don't really want to do that kind of thing. We talked about the aris, what happens to the investment that you made. And we had a bit of a debate about which case and who gets to get percentages in which situation. We talked about someone who runs away. How do we consider them? Then we had these three things that Rav Huna said, when there's a minor, either on this side or that side, right? The relative side or the one who's taken into captivity, the laws are a little bit different, right? We have to make exceptions because people might take advantage of minors, or also minors might not know how to handle the land. So we're not going to bring a minor in to handle land. We're also not going to bring a relative to take his property because the relative might seize the property. We tried to say maybe it's not in situations where there'll be less of a chance that the relative will seize the property and get away with it. And then we said in the end, no, we really have to take this seriously because people really do take advantage. Then we had the case of the Safta, which kind of was a good, playing out of all the possibilities and all the issues that we discussed earlier today, and that was a good case. And then we have Mari Bar Isak, we don't really know how this is connected to our whole story at all. In fact, it's not really connected, but later there's going to be an issue that's going to come up that they're going to try to prove from the halacha in our case. And with that, we'll finish till the next Mishnah at the beginning of tomorrow's stuff. Wishing everyone a good week, and we should hear B'sorot Tovot, especially in light of all our discussion of captives and getting taken out of captivity. Zlat Hashem, they will get out soon. Have a good day.